Think about how we try to understand societies long gone. So much of it comes down to their burials, right? The way they honored their dead, the things they left with them. It feels like we can almost read their story. But how often do we really stop and, question if our modern interpretations are actually hitting the mark?
That's such a critical point.
Mm.
Yeah. We bring our own sort of 21st century assumptions to these ancient practices, and sometimes that can lead us to conclusions that might not reflect the reality of those times at all. What seems obvious to us now could have held a completely different significance then.
Okay, let's unpack this because that's exactly where our deep dive is taking us today. We're diving into some fascinating recent archaeological work that's offering, well, a new perspective on ancient Maya burial customs. Forget those dramatic Hollywood images of constant human sacrifice for a moment, because we're going to explore a potentially much more nuanced explanation for what are known as secondary burials.
Precisely. And you, our listener, shared some excellent sources on ancient Maya mortuary practices. We're focusing on the compelling research of Dr. Angelina J. Her article, Dearly Departed, Ancestors, Body Partability, and Making Place at Dos Hombres, Belize, along with a related news piece. It really pushes back on some of the traditional interpretations. And this isn't just about the Maya either. Rethinking our assumptions about fragmented remains could have implications for how we understand burial practices across various ancient cultures.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to really get to grips with these alternative ideas. We're going to dig into concepts like placemaking and body partability, how they might explain these secondary burials. And to make it tangible, we'll be focusing on a specific and really interesting case study from an archaeological site in Belize.
Okay, so before we delve into Dr. Locker's specific findings, let's maybe consider the prevailing understanding. For a long time, when archaeologists have come across secondary burials in Mesoamerica, things like isolated skulls, arm bones found on their own, or just teeth appearing separately from a full skeleton.
Yeah.
The go-to explanation has often involved violence or some form of sacrifice.
Right.
These scattered remains were frequently interpreted as offerings or maybe evidence of ritual killings connected to primary burials or even the consecration of buildings.
Right. It paints a pretty vivid and often quite gruesome picture. But here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Locker's research suggests a different story, particularly when we're looking at burials in non-elite sort of everyday contexts. She proposes that some of these secondary burials might actually be tied to ancestor veneration, this idea of placemaking and the ancient Maya's beliefs about the very nature of the soul.
That's a really important shift in how we might understand these practices.
Yeah. To appreciate it fully, we probably need to touch on the ancient Maya concept of the soul and its connection to the physical body. Their view wasn't necessarily that the soul was a single, indivisible thing that completely departed with death. They actually conceived of it as having several distinct parts.
Okay, break that down for us. What were these different aspects of the soul?
Well, there was the ba, often understood as the self, residing in or represented by the head, the core life force, in a way. Then you have ik, which is the breath of the soul associated with wind, but also significantly with jade. And quite interestingly for this discussion, teeth.
Teeth, okay.
Yeah. Then Chul was considered the essential spirit of a person located in the heart and blood. And finally, why were these companion spirits, often animals, that were active during sleep and were believed to share a life force with the individual? So the soul wasn't this one single thing that just vanished. It had these different facets. And some of those, like Ike being linked to teeth, could potentially retain significance even when separated from the rest of the body. It wasn't just a random body part. It held specific spiritual meaning.
Exactly. The belief was that the soul's essence wasn't rigidly confined to the complete physical form. This opens up the possibility that specific body parts, like teeth, could symbolize the whole person or, serve as a means of connecting with deceased ancestors.
And this leads us right to the specific burial Dr. Locker studied, doesn't it? This non-elite burial that offers a window into this different perspective.
Yes, exactly. This is a late preclassic co-burial dating from roughly 300 BCE to 250 CE, discovered at the archaeological site of Dos Hombres in Belize. More specifically, it was found in the Dancer group, which seems to have been a rural household of commoners, situated about a mile west, maybe a bit more, of the main ceremonial center of Dos Hombres.
So definitely not a burial of someone high-ranking in a central location. That's an immediate clue, right? Given that the traditional view of sacrifice tends to focus on the elite.
Right.
What exactly did the archaeologists uncover at this burial site, the one designated as Burial Episode 2?
Okay, so the primary burial was of a young woman. The grave itself had some notable features: a deliberately modified step in the bedrock and a U-shaped arrangement of stones placed above it, likely serving as markers for the grave.
Markers.
They also found grave goods, including a Laguna Verde-incised dish near her head, a Sierra Red dish by her torso, several jade beads and a pendant close to her skull, and a rather unexpected find: a large anvil or maybe a lithic core near her torso.
And an anvil, wow, that definitely speaks to a different kind of status than, gold and precious stones.
Precisely. It really underscores the non-elite nature of the burial, possibly reflecting the daily activities or tools important to this household. Interestingly, they also discovered a deposit of 42 freshwater mussel shells near her knees, strongly suggesting a feasting ritual took place around the time of her burial. A communal act of remembrance, perhaps.
Okay, so a burial with personal touches and maybe a community gathering involved. What about the way the body was positioned?
The young woman was placed in a flexed position on her back, oriented along an east-west axis, with her head pointing west and her face towards the north. Now, this is significant because it deviates from the more typical north-south orientation observed in other burials in that region.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this difference in alignment could hint at distinct traditions or maybe affiliations.
Okay, so a unique primary burial in several ways, but we're focusing on secondary burials here. So what about the other individuals found at this site?
Right, so 2 other individuals were identified, but only through the presence of their teeth. Just the teeth.
Only teeth.
Yes. One individual was estimated to be between 20 and 34 years old at the time of death, and the other between 30 and 40.
Just teeth. That's a stark contrast to finding complete or even partially complete secondary remains like, long bones or skulls.
Exactly. And this is where the isotopic analysis becomes so informative. Dr. Locker and her team analyzed strontium and oxygen isotopes from the teeth of all 3 individuals. These isotopes act like chemical signatures, essentially, providing clues about where someone spent their early childhood based on the food and water they consumed in that region.
And what did these isotopic signatures reveal? Were all these individuals from the same area? Or
Well, the results indicated that the young woman, the primary burial, was indeed local to Dos Hombres. Her isotopic ratios matched the expected local range. However, the 2 individuals represented solely by their teeth showed strontium isotope ratios that fell outside this local range, strongly suggesting they were not originally from Dos Hombres, non-local.
So we have a local woman buried with the teeth of 2 non-local individuals. Okay. This is where Dr. Locker's interpretation really challenges the conventional idea of sacrifice, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Given the non-elite context and the peripheral location of this burial, the standard explanations of high-status sacrifice become much less tenable, much less likely. Sacrificial practices were generally more closely associated with prominent individuals or major ceremonial centers. A commoner household on the outskirts doesn't really fit that pattern.
Right. And the fact that it's only teeth from these non-local individuals, how does that connect with the Maya beliefs about the soul we were just discussing, that I King thing?
This is a crucial connection.
Yes.
Remembering that Ike, the breath, the soul, was associated with teeth. Dr. Locker proposes that these non-local teeth represent emergent ancestors.
Emergent ancestors.
Right. Rather than being victims of sacrifice, these teeth could have been intentionally brought to this new location as part of placemaking practices.
Placemaking. Okay, that's a central idea here. Can you elaborate on what that means in this context? What is placemaking?
Sure. Placemaking in this sense refers to the active process of establishing ancestral connections and rights to a specific place. This would have been particularly important in situations of migration, perhaps, or when a community wanted to maintain ties with ancestors buried elsewhere. By bringing these ancestral remains, even just teeth, imbued with the essence of 8 to this new household, they were essentially grounding their lineage and their claim to this territory.
Oh, okay.
So for a calmer family like the Dancer group, bringing these teeth wasn't some abstract ritual. It was maybe a practical way of saying, our ancestors belong here, therefore we belong here.
So the primary individual, the local young woman, might be seen as a kind of foundational ancestor for this particular household, the Dancer group. And her connection to this place is sort of strengthened by the symbolic presence of these non-local ancestral teeth.
That's the core of Dr. Locker's argument, yes. The local woman, with her clear ties to the land, combined with the symbolic presence of these non-local emergent ancestors. It reinforces the household's lineage and their right to be there. The accompanying rituals, like the feasting we mentioned, further emphasize the significance of this event in establishing their connection to both the place and their ancestors.
It's interesting you mentioned the dancer group wasn't continuously inhabited. There was a later period of reoccupation during the Late Classic. Could these earlier burials have played a role in that later settlement?
Well, Dr. Locker suggests that the later inhabitants might have indeed utilized heirlooms, possibly even items from this earlier burial episode 2, to kind of reestablish their own sense of place and lineage. For instance, a Sierra Red dish, the same type found in the Late Preclassic burial, was also discovered in a later burial at the dancer group.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this hints at a possible continuity, a way for the later occupants to link themselves to the history of that location and its earlier inhabitants.
So this concept of body partability, the separation and movement of ancestral remains and placemaking weren't just isolated incidents. They had this lasting significance for how communities understood their history and their connection to the land over generations.
Precisely. Body partability allowed for the ancestral essence to be, well, distributed and moved. Bones, even just teeth-carrying Ike, could function as these seeds for making place, as Dr. Locker so aptly describes it.
Seeds for making place. I like that.
Yeah. This practice wasn't simply about remembering the deceased. It was an active means by which living communities negotiated their lineage, their identity, and their rights to land and resources. And, this isn't just a niche Maya practice. Thinking about placemaking through the lens of ancestor veneration offers a completely different way to interpret fragmented remains found in various ancient cultures globally, potentially overturning long-held assumptions about conflict or ritual violence.
It could even create broader connections between communities that weren't geographically close, right? If families moved and brought pieces of their ancestors with them, it's like maintaining a tangible link to their origins and their identity.
Absolutely. It could forge these horizontal community connections across distances, fostering a sense of shared ancestry and identity, even when physically separated. Ultimately, this research underscores that human remains has a profound significance in ancient Maya society. They weren't simply passively buried. They were actively used to shape memory and to create and reinforce a sense of belonging to a place.
So the crucial takeaway here is that we need to be really careful about automatically interpreting fragmented human remains as evidence of sacrifice. It's not always that simple. Dr. Locker's study offers this really compelling alternative framework, emphasizing the vital role of ancestor veneration and this active process of placemaking, especially in non-elite contexts. It gives us a much more nuanced picture.
Yes, it provides a richer, more nuanced understanding of how the ancient Maya viewed the body, the soul, and their deep and enduring connection to their ancestors and the land they inhabited. It really challenges us to look beyond the more sensational interpretations and to consider the everyday practices and belief systems that shape their world.
This really makes you reconsider things, doesn't it? Considering this perspective, how might we reevaluate other archaeological findings involving fragmented human remains, in different cultures around the world? What other nonviolent explanations might exist for practices we currently interpret through a lens of conflict or ritual killing?
That's the really important question to keep in mind, I think. The concepts of body partability, ancestor veneration, and placemaking offer a fascinating new lens. A lens through which to understand how different cultures across time have engaged with their dead in ways that extend far beyond simple disposal. It really encourages us to delve more deeply into their belief systems and social structures to truly grasp the significance of these practices.